What up people, it's Zach, welcome back, and can I just say, I really miss the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. Those of you that watch my channel know I like my share of Straw Hat videos, because that's what really got me into this series, this team building, crew building aspect, where we keep adding new, unique characters, and the Grand Fleet was a really fun way to expand on the Straw Hat brand without adding crew members to that sacred main crew. And it's been a minute since we've seen the guy, so I kinda miss him, so in this video, we're gonna be discussing the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. When exactly are they gonna return to the story? What is Oda's plan for them, and will we get any new Straw Hat Grand Fleet members? We're gonna break all that down, but first I want to welcome all the new King Pirates crew members because we're now over 36,000 members. If you're new to the crew, say hi in the comments and let me know one theory that you have about One Piece. And if you're not yet part of the crew and want to keep up with our One Piece conversations, hit that subscribe button and join us on the adventure. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is really break down what the Straw Hat Grand Fleet is, because I feel like there's still a misunderstanding of what the Grand Fleet is to the Straw Hats, and this is especially important when we're discussing potential new members, because I've done a Grand Fleet video in the past and I get all these comments like, what about Katakuri and Marco? And those picks are just not realistic because of what the Grand Fleet is. The members of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet directly serve under Luffy as subordinates, and this was something they chose to do themselves through a sake cup exchange of parent to child. And of course these sake cup exchanges are very symbolic. That's how Luffy, Ace, and Sabo became brothers. But with the Grand Fleet, the ceremony they chose was a parent to child ceremony, because for them they wanted to serve under Luffy and treat him as a superior. Now ironically, Luffy didn't actually even drink the sake cup and accept them, but the Grand Fleet members themselves still drank those sake cups and seized themselves as subordinates to Luffy. They fly the Straw Hat flag along with their own flag to kind of symbolize that. So when we talk about people that are candidates to join the Grand Fleet later, there's really not a lot of options. Somebody like Law is not gonna willingly serve under Luffy. At most he's just an ally like he is now. Even with someone like Marco, he really has no reason to serve under Luffy. He's still gonna help him as an ally, but he's not gonna be a subordinate. So then you have characters like Katakuri, who's not even an ally yet, so he's definitely not gonna be a Grand Fleet member. Even somebody like Bellamy is not part of the Grand Fleet because he doesn't want to serve under Luffy. So that's something really important to consider when we're talking about new members. It's definitely not impossible some more people join, but there's really only a couple of candidates. Because another thing you have to consider is that the Grand Fleet is kind of unofficial. Luffy himself doesn't even recognize them as subordinates. He didn't actually drink the sake cups and kind of just treats them as friends. Even when we got the Grand Fleet cover story, it was named the self-proclaimed Straw Hat Grand Fleet. So for someone to realistically join the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, members of the Grand Fleet would probably need to be present. Luffy's not gonna go out of his way to invite somebody because he doesn't even see it as a thing. So honestly, if we get any new members to the Grand Fleet, it'll be when the Grand Fleet finally returns to the story, everybody is together and having a good time, which by the way, if you're having a good time watching this video, drop a like for the YouTube algorithm. But with that being said, let's tackle the question of when the Grand Fleet will return to the story. First off, Wano has always been a very popular option because of how much is happening. It's probably the biggest war we've seen in the story, and the Straw Hat Alliance is going up against a lot. So realistically, it does feel like the perfect time for the Straw Hat Grand Fleet to enter the scene and kind of even out the playing field. There's also the factor of Luffy's Viver card, which each Grand Fleet captain has, and that's really the only way they can communicate with Luffy long distance. If that Viver card starts burning up, they'll know he's in trouble. And in Wano so far, Luffy has been in trouble a few times. He got his ass beat by Kaido off rip, and also back in Udon when he took on all that mummy disease, he probably wasn't feeling too hot either. So because of that, many people have theorized that Luffy's Viver card was probably burning up multiple times, which gives a reason for the Straw Hat Grand Fleet members to show up. Now for me, I really thought this was a good theory for a long time. All the explanations that's being theorized make sense, but the one thing that's kind of changed is the tide of the story. I'm not gonna spoil anything for anime onlys, but as it is right now, it does feel like the Straw Hat Alliance could win without the Grand Fleet. Now of course that's just my personal feeling, it could definitely go the other way. It's possible the Alliance still ends up losing and maybe then the Straw Hat Grand Fleet could show up. But as of right now, if I had to bet on it, I would bet on the Straw Hat Grand Fleet not all showing up together. Now I say all showing up together because I think it's a good possibility that some of them do show up. Bartolomeo, for example, I feel like the moment Luffy's Viver card burns up even a little bit, he's darting straight to Luffy. So I can see a scenario where Bartolomeo does show up, but the rest of the Grand Fleet doesn't. The other interesting thing about Bartolomeo is that he actually has some connections to Wano. As we saw in the Oden flashback, one of those old Kurozumi guys had Bartolomeo's devil fruit. We still don't have an explanation on that, and Bartolomeo arriving to Wano could be a way to kind of flesh that out. Another thing to consider is that the last time we saw Bartolomeo in the cover story, the man was burning up Shanks' flag in one of his territories. While that was a pretty funny scene, I feel like that should have some repercussions. After Wano, we don't really know where we go next, but we do have to meet Shanks eventually. So So if Bartolomeo shows up near the end of Wano, that could be a device to get us to Shanks and maybe even Elbaf. And then maybe in a later arc when Luffy's really in danger, more Grand Fleet members show up and we get the full return of the Grand Fleet. That's something else we kind of have to consider. It wouldn't really make sense for them to all show up at once. Right now they're all over the place in the world. It would be kind of weird if they just all showed up at once. So honestly, I think when the Grand Fleet finally returns, it'll be kind of scattered and they'll be showing up one by one before we get this like double page spread of them all together. Now as far as how they'll show up, I already mentioned Bartolomeo, but Sai and Leo are also possibilities. Both of them were involved in the Reverie, so they know what happened over there, and the events of the Reverie are going to be very impactful for what happens after Wano. There are many people that were involved that are important to the Straw Hats as well, like Vivi and Sabo, and a lot of people have theorized that maybe towards the end of Wano, Sai shows up with like Sabo or Vivi. So that could be one way more Grand Fleet members show up, and story-wise, that could be a way that Oda gives us a taste of the Straw Hat Grand Fleets before he brings them all back and gathered in one place. Pause moment on that taste line, but you know what I mean. But yeah, as for when the Straw Hat Grand Fleet is gonna return, if it's not Wano, it's still gonna have to be a scenario where Luffy's really in danger. And of course, it's really hard to predict what's gonna happen next in Oda's story after Wano, but the things that I think absolutely needs to happen after Wano are Elbaf, Lodestar, Laugh-Tale, a fight with Blackbeard, and the fight against the world government. Now out of those options, I think Lodestar and Laugh-Tale, the Grand Fleet doesn't have to get involved. Those arcs feel more Straw Hat focused, where some of them are gonna be accomplishing their dreams, they're gonna get a lot of information, and it's probably gonna be more of an info dump as opposed to this very dangerous situation where they need the Grand Fleet to show up. Elbaf, on the other hand, it'll really depend on what kind of arc it is. Some people see it as more of a chill arc where we don't get a lot happening. Maybe the Straw Hats just end up meeting the red hair pirates, they have a Davy bag fight, and that's it. But recently I did do a video on the possibility that Oda uses Ragnarok as an inspiration for Elbaf. I explain it more in depth in the video, but a lot of crazy things could happen if that's the case. Loki could be up to no good, a big war could break out, Blackbeard could get involved, there might be ancient weapons, and if some semblance of that is the route that Oda decides to take with Elbaf, I can see the Grand Fleet showing up. And honestly, that's one of the only scenarios where I see them all showing up before the final war. With the final war against the world government, we know that the Straw Hat Grand Fleet have to be involved. That's when Luffy's gonna need all the help he can get going up against the Marines and the world government, so at the very least, we're definitely gonna get the Grand Fleet in that war. But personally, I've always seen that war as like the last final war in the story, and this is more just a personal preference, but I really like the Grand Fleet, so I hope they show up before that. But of course, in the end, Oda's not gonna care about my feelings. He has a plan for the story, and his plan could be simply to just have the Grand Fleet for that final battle. I mean, after all, the Grand Fleet kinda already got their own arc in Dressrosa. Pretty much all the captains got their individual moments and fights, and on top of that, we even have the cover story, so maybe they just don't show back up until the final war. But if they do, like I mentioned, I think Elbaf is an option if there's like a catastrophic war. The fight against Blackbeard, I'm kinda iffy on because I feel like the Straw Hats are perfectly lined up to fight against the Blackbeard pirates. Like, I think most of us expect each Straw Hat to get a 1v1 fight against a Titanic captain, so I'm not sure that the Grand Fleet is gonna need to get involved in that battle. Blackbeard does seem like he has a lot more men after him and just a lot more soldiers, but I don't just want to see the Grand Fleet take on foot soldiers, I want to see the captains fight stronger people. So unless Blackbeard has recruited some stronger people below the Titanic captains, I don't really see the Grand Fleet getting involved. So for right now, my best guess at the Grand Fleet returning is probably the final war, followed by Elbaf if there's this Ragnarok situation. Now finally, let's move on to the conversation on whether or not there'll be more Grand Fleet members. Now this is kind of nostalgic for me because I did a video on this previously. It was my first video that blew up on this channel. It was a video I made when I had 200 something subscribers. It got me to 1,000 subscribers. So anybody that watched that video when it first came out, you're an OG. Thank you for supporting me for so long. But yeah, in that video, I kind of broke down the same idea that the Grand Fleet are subordinates of Luffy. But I feel like even in that video, I was kind of too lax with the candidates I was considering. I had people in there like the Toby Ropo, which honestly is just not realistic. So this video, I'm gonna be a lot more strict and realistic. And honestly, the most realistic option is that we get no more Straw Hat Grand Fleet members. You gotta remember that the Grand Fleet kind of has a special bond with each other. All of them met and fought with each other in Dressrosa, and they all know each other. And again, like I mentioned earlier, the Grand Fleet's not really an official thing. Luffy doesn't recognize them. He's not gonna invite anybody to it. So if we have a scenario where the Grand Fleet doesn't show up again until the final war, we're probably not gonna get any more members. Of course, along the way, Luffy's gonna get more allies like Law and Marco and maybe even Katakuri. But for people to join the Grand Fleet, this unofficial thing that was created in Dressrosa, you need the Grand Fleet present for that. So honestly, as of right now, the most realistic option might be that we get no more more new Grand Fleet members, but it's also not impossible that we get some new members, and I do have some candidates. And first off, one of the most realistic candidates I think is Carrot. Carrot's another character I've kind of switched my stance on a lot because she's kind of a weird case. Like, she's a prominent enough character, she gets a decent amount of development and screen time, but in the end she still feels like a background character and not somebody that's gonna join the main crew. I explained it a little more in my final Straw Hat video, so go check that out if you're interested. But yeah, for me right now, although I like Carrot, I just don't think she's gonna be a Straw Hat. But again, at the same time, she's a pretty prominent character. I think she's gonna want to explore the world, so maybe the Straw Hat Grand Fleet is the perfect option for her. Honestly, one of the few people that I think makes sense for the Grand Fleet are the Samurai and the Minks. After Wano ends and Kaido is defeated, the Minks and the Samurai are gonna be indebted to Luffy, so I think they would absolutely be willing to serve under Luffy if they knew about the Grand Fleet. And if we get a scenario where Bartolomeo shows up to Wano and he's like preaching the gospel of the Straw Hats, and the Minks and the Samurai find out about the Grand Fleet, I can see them creating their own crew and joining the Grand Fleet. The other thing about the Minks and the Samurai is that I'm sure there's gonna be people that want to go out and explore. Both Wano and Zou have been isolated by themselves, and we've seen throughout the story there's been people that want to go out and explore. Of course, we had Odin from Wano, but also Neko and Inu from Zou, then Pedro, then Carrot. Once Wano's borders open, I'm sure there'll be many people that want to go out to explore, and Carrot will be one of those people, so maybe she'll be part of a Mink Samurai crew. I can't really see her as a captain because she's so young and inexperienced, so maybe a scabbard like Izo could be the captain because he already has experience. That could be an option for Carrot, or maybe if Bartolomeo's there, she just joins him or something. But yeah, for me, Carrot, the Samurai, and the Minks are one of the most realistic options, and besides them, the only other one I see that's slightly possible is Boa Hancock. Realistically, it really wouldn't make sense, like she would not exchange parent to child sake cups with Luffy because she loves him, but because Luffy has no romantic feelings at all, maybe she just decides to serve under him because she would do anything for him. And I could see a funny scenario where Bartolomeo is praising Luffy and being the #1 Luffy stan, and she kind of fights with him and gets jealous, and because of that somehow she ends up in the Grand Fleet. But that's just like a slight funny possibility that I could see Oda kind of doing. Other than Hancock though, I really don't see any options. If you have any good candidates, let me know in the comments and tell me the reason as well. But honestly, the most realistic option might be that there will be no more new members. That's it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Got another video right here on Usopp and his dream and how he becomes a brave warrior. Check out my links in the description. I'll see you guys next time. Peace!